groups of three. If I could start with Beth Rigby from Sky, Libby Vino from ITV, then Laura Kunstler, BBC. So, Beth?
Oh, right, sorry, have we got a mic?
The handheld coming to you, yeah.
Thank you. Jeremy Corbyn, just two questions. Firstly, are you saying that any trade deal with the US would be impossible without putting the NHS on the table? And just on the issue of trust, you're suggesting to the public today that they shouldn't trust Boris Johnson on the NHS, but of course the Chief Rabbi suggested yesterday that the public shouldn't trust you to protect all minorities in this country. You didn't apologise last night over the issue of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Is that because you think the Chief Rabbi is wrong and you haven't done anything personally wrong? Thank you.
And then Libby.
Jeremy Corbyn, you say that you're on the side of the people. Does that include Jewish people? And do you want to take this opportunity to apologise for anti-Semitic incidents in the Labour Party that have happened on your watch?
And Libby, do you have a question about the issue that we're actually discussing today, or was that just an opportune moment to get to dig in about something else?
It's not a dig. It's
very serious indeed. But we're here today to discuss the NHS and the trade deal.
Yeah, but
I thought as a journalist attending this event, you might have a question about that issue, because I'm sure you'll agree that is also something of real importance to the British public.
It is of importance.
Good. So do you have a question?
Can I ask Mr. Corbyn on the NHS whether he accepts that Donald Trump has already denied that the NHS would be on the table in any future trade talks, and what interest would a future British government have in doing a deal that effectively made medicines unaffordable in this country? Why would any government have an incentive to actually sign a trade deal that involved that kind of equation?
Okay, and Laura.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Gardner. It's no secret that American companies want access to the UK drugs market, but in these piles and piles of documents, do you have evidence that UK ministers agreed that the health service should be part of trade talks? Because the two are different things. And just on a brief point, again, Mr. Corbyn, you were given the opportunity last night several times to apologise to the Jewish community. One of your shadow ministers, Niall Griffiths, has said that the Labour Party should apologise to the Jewish community. Have you changed your mind this morning about saying that?
Okay. Sure.
Thank you for your questions. I made it very clear anti-Semitism is completely wrong within our society. Our party did make it clear when I was elected leader and after that anti-Semitism was unacceptable in any form in our party or our society, and did indeed offer its sympathies and apologies to those that had suffered, and the party set up a process in which I proposed that be a strong process, and I proposed an even stronger process at the National Executive in July, which was agreed by the party conference and was therefore is now part of our rules, and people who commit any acts of anti-Semitism are rapidly dealt with in the party. It affects 0.001% of party membership, and we are saying one is one too many. And I acknowledge what the Chief Rabbi said yesterday. I would also point out that very large numbers of other people in the Jewish community have made it very clear that they do support Labour, that they do recognise my absolute commitment that every community in our country will be safe under a Labour government, and that we will work with every community in this country to ensure their safety, protection of synagogues, mosques and temples, schools, cemeteries, and anything else that affects the life of a particular community. We've made that abundantly clear, and I will continue to make that clear, because we have to be one society. We have to work together to defeat the rise of the far right and the scourge of racism within our society. And that is exactly why we published our Race and Faith Manifesto yesterday, which made that very clear in relation to all communities. Abuse of a Jewish family on a train is vile and wrong. abuse of a Muslim woman walking down the street is vile and wrong. None of it is acceptable, and none of it will ever be acceptable, either within our party, by our party, or by a government that I would be proud to lead, that would be the most anti-racist government you've ever seen, because that is what I've spent my whole life doing, fighting against racism. And I will die fighting against racism in any form. It's a poison and a scourge. The other points have been raised. Barry will answer some of them on the National Health Service. If you want to know whether ministers were involved in these talks or not, then they sanctioned the talks. They're obviously fully aware of the talks, and they're the ones that were declining to make the documents published and public in the first
Indeed,
place.
they led the talks from the start. And we know that George Hollingbury has been involved in those talks as a government minister. So, yes, look, in effect, there are four ways in which a trade deal can... most of the questions revolved around the same issue, so let me try and deal with it. There are four ways in which a trade deal can undermine our NHS. By the way in which disputes are settled, by what is included or excluded, which is sometimes called the negative list system, by the patenting regime that is adopted, and that's the importance of extending the life of those drugs so that the drug companies can gain more money from those patented drugs without the use of generics. And the fourth way is indirectly through the data regime, which we in the NHS have the best data in the world. It's been collected the longest and it's the most comprehensive. And so big pharmaceutical companies want to get that data in order to be able to produce more drugs that they can then patent and sell back to us. And the control of that data regime is incredibly important as well. So all of these things are the ways in which a trade negotiation, a free trade agreement, can impact on our health services in this country. Did you want to specifically take... Yeah, okay, let me go to... Well, if I can take the further band of three, I've got Paul Wall, then Toby Baxter from Channel 4, and then Pippa Crerar from the Mirror.
Paul Ward, is this working? Mr Corbyn, given what you've outlined today, are you also suggesting that a Labour government would legislate to stop any of these trade practices happening? Would you legislate to protect data in the NHS? Would you legislate to make sure, for example, that there is no power to sue the NHS and that there is no power to engage in services liberalisation? And a second one, can I just ask, you've always said that this election is not about you, but do you agree with Lord Kerslake then, that he was right to suggest that your leadership would actually be part of a conversation with the Liberal Democrats and the SNP in the event of any hung parliament?
Okay, and then Toby.
Victoria MacDonald from Channel 4 News. Two questions. I didn't quite understand your reasoning on the trade talks, because isn't it the case in any trade talks that the Americans, for instance, would put everything they want on the table and it's up to the British government to then negotiate a way to a position that they want? Secondly, Mr Corbyn, you've taken a neutral stance on Brexit, but isn't it the case that if there was no Brexit, this wouldn't even be on the table? We wouldn't have a forest of papers sitting on our knees now, because we wouldn't have to negotiate a trade talk.
And Pippa.
Thank you. Pippa Crerar from the Daily Mirror. Just on the climate change aspect of the trade talks, I mean, the point made by the US in these documents is that the US Congress decided in 2015 that there'll be no mention of greenhouse gas emissions reductions in trade agreements, and the trade emissary suggests that that ban won't be lifted anytime soon. So how does Labour, given it's sort of a US legal issue, how would Labour get around that and make sure that climate change and greenhouse emissions were on the table? And then specifically, Mr Corbyn, can I ask, was yesterday the worst day of your campaign so far?
I love everyday campaigning, and yesterday was another day that I loved, because I go out all the time, meeting people, listening to people, understanding what people's fears and concerns are, and I'm horrified at the levels of inequality, poverty and injustice that have come in Britain since austerity came in 2010, and I'm utterly determined to win this election, to end austerity, provide homes for the homeless, and end the disgraceful levels of child poverty in this country. And that is the message that I carry out all across the country. And I'll be doing that today and every day up till December the 12th. On Paul's question, there are no talks with any other parties. We're fighting this election to win it. We're not fighting to form a coalition. We're not fighting it to do a deal with other parties. We're fighting it proudly as the Labour Party on our manifesto, and I hope we move into government on December the 13th to start righting some of the wrongs and injustices that austerity has brought to this country, and I'm proud of the manifesto on which we're fighting the election. On the point about trade talks, and Barry will deal with this as well, and the point that Vicky made about no deal. Well, it's Boris Johnson that has tried to threaten a no deal exit from the European Union and keeps on pivoting to say that he would do a special trade deal with the United States. And I think these documents show the nature of those talks. And when talks reach a point where they're exchanging text, it sounds to me like they're getting awfully near to some form of agreement and the dangers that go with it. Our strategy, as you know, is that within 3 months we'll negotiate an agreement with the European Union so that we do have market access to Europe and we protect the Good Friday Agreement, and within 6 months we'll put that to a referendum alongside Remain. So there will be an option to leave the European Union but not wreck all our very important trading relationships with Europe, or to remain within the European Union. That is a way of bringing people together, and our party is determined that that will be what we will do in government. The points about the legislation that we would introduce or the system we would adopt are quite simply this: we will not accept the idea that there is investor protection in the way in which trade deals are run. We would also make sure, and Barry will speak on this because he's been very central to developing our green industrial revolution, that protection of the environment would be absolutely part of our trade arrangements as well, because clearly every department of government has to play its part in getting us to net zero emissions as quickly as we possibly can.